will come to the table of the ministers the proposal with additional names, so the decision in this sense has also already been taken. And the third element of our decision from our action is to start the preparatory work. So the services, both in the ES and in the Commission, starting the preparatory work on any other appropriate action that, from our side, can be taken in view of ensuring the implementation of the Minsk Agreement. This was a result by consensus of a long and good discussion among the ministers. As I said coming in earlier today, this was also something that I discussed in these hours and days with President Poroshenko, with Minister Klimkin in this framework. And we hope that this can help putting pressure, in particular on Russia, to make positive steps and prevent negative steps that we've seen in the recent days. I will stop here. The conclusions contain other sets of measures, from communication to other things that you will see. But I would say, I guess, your main attention was concentrated on the sanctions that you might have noticed I didn't refer to coming inside the meeting. But now I cannot say I'm happy to announce that we've taken these decisions, because I think that the situation on the ground in Ukraine is not giving us any space for being happy of anything. But of one thing I can be happy tonight is that we kept our unity, which is, as we've also always said, our strength, and we've shown that the European Union is ready to take further measures and to prepare further measures for the weeks to come if the situation not only doesn't improve but gets worse, as it was the case in the last days.
Thank you very much. We'll take questions now. Please introduce yourself and the media you're working for. Anna, I saw your first hand. And then we'll move to the middle of the room.
Thank you, Anna Słojewska, Polish Daily Rzeczpospolita. High Representative, does this preparatory work that you have mentioned include the further economic sanctions? And also, I would like to ask you, because Polish Minister of Foreign Affairs said that the discussion today was more emotional than usual. Can you confirm this? Thank you.
No, we always have very emotional discussions with the ministers. No, I would say that obviously it was a very deep discussion, because when you ask difficult questions, you have always a discussion that goes at the roots of the reasons of the steps or the events, and also the big questions of where we are moving and what is in our hands to do to support the solution, finally, of the conflict in Ukraine. So no, I wouldn't say it was more emotional than other times, but it was for sure a deep discussion, but also very rational, I would say. And yes, it does include preparatory work for further restrictive measures, as was indicated also by the statement of the heads of state and governments, as was somehow indicated also by the discussion we had today. When we say any action, it means any.
Robin Emmett, Reuters. In the final statement, in the conclusions, you've taken out the reference to further restrictive measures. Is that because of the Greek resistance, the new Greek government's resistance to further new sanctions against Russia, economic sanctions? Thank you.
Have you seen previous versions of the draft? How do you know what we took out or we added? That answers your questions.
At the back, and then here, Sergey.
Hello, Danny Kemp from AFP. How cooperative did you find the Greek foreign minister on the issue, given the earlier reservations expressed by the new prime minister about the leader's statement?
I have to say, obviously, he was taking his own position, the position of the Greek government, that was changing, as you know, just in the days when this decision of having this Foreign Affairs Council, Extraordinary Foreign Affairs Council, was taken. But let me say that I called Prime Minister Tsipras on Monday, on Tuesday, sorry, not only to congratulate with him, but also to discuss start and discuss the content of our discussion today. I didn't expect them to have a government in place so early so that the new minister could be present today. That was the case. I talked to the minister already yesterday on the draft conclusions. And today, let me say that sticking to their positions, but the attitude was extremely constructive. And I would say especially dedicated to finding and keeping our unity of the European Union. And I think this is something that we need to stress. I think this was an extremely positive exercise that we not only welcomed him in the family as we do with all the new foreign ministers, but also that we can for sure come out of our meeting with a consensual decision, a substantial decision that is consistent and credible, very much in line with what was discussed also with President Tusk during the weekend.
Sergei Voropayev, National Radio of Ukraine. You know, I have probably a little bit philosophical question. There is a strong impression that sanctions are a little bit alleviated now, despite many statements on the worsening situation in Ukraine. Why I say this, that because in March, when we had only annexation of Crimea, if we can say only, it was sanctions for 1 year introduced, and now we have just extension for 6 months. How could you explain this?
No, let me be very clear on this. What we have decided today is a reinforcement of our measures, because we decided today, so before they expire in the 15th of March, the extension of the existing restrictive measures. So we have decided today to prolong them. And the decision was always 6 months and 6 months. So the decision was taken today. It was a decision on additional measures in terms of timing, as you know. And let me also underline 3 different things. Extension in the time of the existing sanctions when it comes to the list. Preparation for decision in 10 days, next week proposal and decision in 10 days of new names to add to the list, which is additional. And third, to start the preparation of any further measure.
From BBC, can I just ask, on the further measures, you said they would be taken if the situation on the ground does not improve or gets worse. Which one is it? Because many people would say it's got worse already. So can you be clear about that?
I can, but in that case I would express my personal opinion, which if you want I can do. But let me also take this opportunity to explain better what is in the hands of the foreign ministers and what is in the hands of the heads of state and government. Last year, the restrictive measures, the economic sanctions, not the list, but the economic sanctions were taken by the European Council. So at the level of heads of state and government. And if you look at the statement of the heads of state and government, it is very clear that they were asking to the foreign minister to start working on further measures, which means that the decision on that will be taken, if they decide to do so, at the European Council. That is in the hands of the President of the Council and of the European Council themselves. Then I will also be there as well, so we will ensure the coherence of the work of the foreign ministers and of the prime ministers and the presidents. And I have to say that in these days, this coordination has worked very well, both with the presidency of the Council and with the presidency of the Commission and the Commission as a whole. I think this makes it possible for everybody that has a specific responsibility to take their responsibility and their decision with a consistent and coherent preparation, also with some legal basis, because you might remember well that the European Union adopts decisions in this sense only when the legal basis is sound, and this requires work from the services. Maybe we take another one?
Your view. What you said you'd also give your view. What's your view?
No. I say that the decision in this sense will be taken, if they decide to do so, by the European Council. And we've always said, in the European Council as well, but in the European Union in general, that any kind of decision on the sanctions, on having further sanctions or lifting the sanctions, which is not the case today, was going to be based on the situation on the ground, on the improvement or worsening of the situation on the ground. And this is an assessment that, as foreign ministers, with the foreign ministers today, we made in a negative way. I started by saying the situation on the ground is getting worse, has got worse, and this is obviously the negative news. This is why I convened this extraordinary council, otherwise we would have met directly on the 9th of February. So the assessment of the situation on the ground from the foreign minister's side is a negative one. That's why we decided to adopt these steps today. The further evaluation of the following developments of the situation on the ground will be done by the foreign ministers themselves on the 9th of February, so in 10 days, and then, if they decide to do so, by the European Council, so the heads of state and government. I hope that replies.
Final question,
Yes. Rostislav Dinchuk, Euro-Atlantic, Agency for Euro-Atlantic Cooperation. Mrs. Mogherini, 2 days ago, after the tragedy in Mariupol, Ukrainian parliament officially recognized Russia as an aggression country, and also two self-declared republics as a terroristic organization. And Ukrainian parliament applied to all international institutions, also a Council of EU, and to support this resolution, to recognize also to those countries as a terroristic countries, terroristic organizations. Which impact will it bring for the relations between EU and Ukraine? And will you support such resolution of Ukrainian institutions?
What impact will bring?
Which kind of impact will bring such resolution of Ukrainian official institutions like Parliament and Cabinet of Ministers that Russia is an aggressive country, and those two republics in Donbass as a terroristic organizations? Will you support this or not?
It will not, I would say that it will not affect the relations between the Ukraine and the European Union in any way. I told you already coming in earlier this afternoon that I had many chances of talking on the phone with President Poroshenko, with Foreign Minister Klimkin just today before we started the meeting. None at all. We didn't have a discussion on these 2 points with the foreign ministers today.
Okay. With this, we conclude the press conference, and thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome at this press conference following the Extraordinary Foreign Affairs Council that